Hello and a very warm welcome to Insight. I'm Amandra Bhatt. Today we talk about the expansion of the Islamist militant group, the Islamic State or the ISIS. A year after announcing a self-declared caliphate, IS fighters are claiming Friday's terror attacks in two different countries. The first was a suicide bomb explosion at a mosque for Shia Muslims in Kuwait City, the first such attack in relatively stable Kuwait. Then in Tunisia, where European tourists were targeted on the beach in a seaside resort. The attacks have claimed over 60 lives. Meanwhile, in France, a man stormed an American-owned chemical plant, decapitated one person and tried to blow up the facility. The attacks followed a chilling warning by the IS of more surprises during the month of Ramadan. Is the ISIS then expanding its footprint beyond areas already seized in Iraq and Syria? We discuss. And to discuss the Islamic State threat, we are joined in our studios by an eminent panel. Please welcome Professor Sreeram Chaulia, is a Dean in the Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to the program, Mr. Chaulia. Dr. Chaulia, why Tunisia? What does the IS want to gain in Tunisia? Tunisia is seen as one of the more successful stories of the so-called Arab Spring Revolution. They've had a democratically elected government there. In fact, they have had 2 elections so far, and it is also one of the more secular of all the Arab nations. Why did the IS choose Tunisia? Because we understand Tunisia also sends the maximum number of foreign fighters to the IS.
Yeah, Tunisia is in transition from authoritarian rule, and transitions can be exploited. And basically what the IS is trying to say is that we can deliver justice Islamic style, and we need to reject this secular modernism and the whole liberal project of elected democracy and ballot box. So they are trying to basically destabilize this transition. In fact, Rashid Ghannouchi, the leader of the Ennahda party of Tunisia, was here in Delhi a couple of months ago, and he was saying that the phenomenon of Islamization and radical fighters being sent overseas is not limited to the transition. It was happening even during Ben Ali's dictatorship, which fell in 2011 through mass protests. And he is saying that it's a legacy of the repression of that period. In other words, he was saying that in the long term, only democracy is a solution to this, because the political frustrations that have built up over time, and on top of it you have economic frustrations in a country like Tunisia that has not been able to set the house in order as far as the workings of the industry and agriculture goes. So all these are adding up to the pressure. So they are sending out lots. And remember, Tunisia borders Libya, and Libya has become totally lawless.
Right.
So Libya has become a kind of a conduit for Tunisian fighters to go across into the Levant, which is the heart of where ISIS is, in Syria and Iraq. So all these factors, the geography as well as the political transition, have made Tunisia ripe for. And remember, this is not the first attack they had. There was a serious attack at a museum in Tunis just a few weeks ago.
Right.
So these massacres are increasing, and in a way, it's a challenge to the idea that there can be a political Islam which is moderate, which is what Ennahda represents. And they're saying there is no alternative to jihad. And that is, I think, the point that they're trying to make through this, saying Ennahda may win or lose elections, doesn't matter, but we will bring, God is on our side, and we're going to fight and use violence to bring about Sharia-based law. So Tunisia has enacted a secular constitution, remember that. So they are opposed to all these things. They think that these institutions like parliament and judiciary, which are not based on Sharia, are haram. And therefore, I think Tunisia is, right bang in the center of the ISIS agenda for its expansion in the Maghreb in North Africa, apart from Libya.
And what about the Tunisian population? You think there is a pro-ISIS sentiment somewhere in the Tunisian society that exists? The government, of course, has banned any kind of ISIS support.
Well, I think, the mass turnout in the elections show that it's still a fringe and not a mainstream viewpoint. But the danger always exists, because the more these transitional authorities fail to deliver in terms of governance, the jihadists can capitalize on it. Remember when the Arab Spring happened 2011, people said what the terrorists could not achieve in 20-30 years of bombings and suicide missions, the people have done it through peaceful mass protests.
Right.
Now what they're saying is, well, the system that the mass protests brought is not delivering instant justice or fulfilling aspirations of the youth. So we have to go back to the gun. So that's the message.
Professor Chaulia, how do you look at what's being done right now in Tunisia, the government shutting down mosques? You think that's going to help?
Yeah, I mean, see, the current regime has elements of the old ancien regime. So some of the security establishment of Ben Ali's time have come back now in a democratic avatar. So they will resort to the old crackdown kind of techniques far more than another, which did have some sympathies to far-right extremists, but of course it always distinguished itself because it had given up violence, it had never advocated for violence. So this transition is shaky and can be disturbed. And what the attacks on tourism do also is scare away investors. So it's going to remain aid dependent, and that's the bane of both Tunisia and Egypt right now. They are unable to pull themselves out of the up by their own socks. So what it means is this is going to be a long effort to try and create a stable state. And until that happens, you're going to see these and I think the main issue for them will be to revive agriculture, fisheries, and of course tourism has taken huge blow. I don't think people are going to go back at all after these two attacks on a museum and on a beach.
Right.
So they can try security measures, but given the volatility of the Maghreb region as a whole, I don't think, I think we should be in for a long haul of destabilization of that country. And again, it's incumbent, as Ambassador Jha was saying, upon the international community, not just France. What happens usually in Africa is these former colonial powers monopolize their ex-colonies and don't let anybody else come in and offer assistance, in different forms, not just monetary assistance. So I think they need to, but they're doing the right things insofar as the design and the institutional progress towards democracy goes. Democratization, it has not yet been stalled. But the jihadists are, as was the case in Algeria and so on, they have means of trying to prevent any transitions from happening or taking you backwards to a previous era. So that is I think the game plan.
Professor Chaulia, I'll continue with you. How do you view the attack in Kuwait, which has come as a surprise to many, considering Kuwait has had, no history of any serious sectarian strife, given its very large Shia population?
I'm seeing a pattern here. This is the third attack on a Shiite mosque after two that happened in Saudi Arabia, also ascribed to ISIS. So ISIS is not really attacking regime targets in Saudi Arabia or in Kuwait. In these conservative Sunni monarchies, Shiites are considered at best second-class citizens. So the attacks are actually happening against a section of the society, minorities, who are considered to be subversive in the first place by the regimes. In other words, who is hand in glove with whom? Saudi and Kuwait have not contributed any substantially to the American bombing campaign in Iraq and Syria against ISIS.
But they are part of the coalition.
Yeah, well, nominally. And nor has Turkey really helped. In fact, the Americans have designated all these so-called allies of theirs as permissive towards ISIS. So America's own allies are not necessarily wholeheartedly against ISIS. And Saudi and Kuwaiti donors, either regime or related to the regime, have been upfront and central in financing ISIS. The latest Pentagon report claims that ISIS has stopped getting money from oil and from extortion and has gone back to relying on foreign donations. So who are these donors? It's the same place it's coming from. And the war in Yemen, the way the Saudis have bombed Shiite civilians as well as guerrillas and have completely flattened the place, seems to send a kind of increase this permissiveness that Shias are fair game, they are apostates and they are not true Muslims, and we can go after them. So it has created this. So I would blame the regimes in these two countries for misguided policies and for their obsession with Iran. All these things have meant that killing Shias is not seen as something out of nature. So what I would like to say is that the attacks in Kuwait, they have not attacked Saudi intelligence or Kuwaiti intelligence. Al-Qaeda did to some extent. Although again there was some shady network of complicity among these regimes and Al-Qaeda. Now I'm seeing the same thing. There is a degree of complicity between these regimes and ISIS, and therefore they are able to operate. I don't think they are sincerely. trying to stop these movements. The bargain between Saudis and Kuwait and UAE and all these, Bahrain with Al-Qaeda, used to be that you go outside and cause mayhem, not on our soil. I think they are going to reach that kind of tacit alliance because the donor network is right there. In fact, the Brookings Institution has done a very comprehensive study of how ISIS rose to become so formidable. It all, in fact, majority are from Kuwait, not even from Saudi. So this is the root genesis of the problem. So the convoluted mindset of these conservative regimes that are afraid of regime change or any kind of threat, and their obsession with the what so-called Shiite crescent has created this phobia for Shias. The Rafidis, as the hardliners call them, they need to be eliminated. So this has created, the minorities are in great threat, not just in the ISIS heartland of Syria and Iraq, where they are enslaving minorities and taking them as concubines and so on, and beheading people, but also now in the Persian Gulf.
Professor Chaulia, what should then be the larger global strategy for countering the IS now that the message is loud and clear? They are trying to spread beyond just Iraq and Syria.
I think my theory is that ISIS is peaking because of confluence of three crises. The first one is the geopolitical crisis, the failure of the Sunni monarchies and Israel on one side to work with the Iranians on the other side. So until that is fixed, and the Americans are not been encouraging this, because it's almost as if they have tried to de-link the nuclear negotiations from the larger regional questions. I think these are all mistakes. We need linkage diplomacy, and we need to have a geopolitical unity of all the anti-ISIS forces. That's the first thing. The second crisis ISIS is exploiting is what I call a crisis of masculinity. It's a deformed masculinity. They are inviting young men, young, deranged, depraved Sunni males to come and own sex slaves from minorities. So it's creating a culture of impunity wherever they are ruling. Beheadings and rapes are like wanton and happening all over the place. And this has created this lawlessness which we abhor from the civilized world. For them it's a normal. In fact, for them it's attractive. So that's what's happening. So we have to reimagine what is an Arab male. What kind of manhood are we promoting? And there have to be counters to this. First of all, from within the Islamic tradition, but also from secular and mixed traditions. People have to come out. The third thing, the crisis is the crisis of governance. What ISIS is basically saying is, by attracting all these disenchanted Sunni, mostly males, but also some women, through its online propaganda and so on, is that you are being governed in ungodly ways. All your problems are because Allah is not up front as your ruler. You got some so-called temporal rulers. Come into the caliphate, and we will bring back, restore the grandeur of, Harun al-Rashid or whatnot. So going back to the Baghdad of the medieval times. So the governance crisis, ISIS is ruling over 8 to 10 million people right now in the territory that it controls. They have imposed very, very harsh Sharia-based, or what I think even Sharia lawyers would be shocked at the kind of punishments that are being meted out. So what they are saying is, this is the proper governance. And to those who are frustrated and those who are angry, the use of force and almost arbitrary force all over the place to determine everything, social order, what one must do, what one must not do. It's worse than Taliban rule in Afghanistan.
Right.
So that is creating a kind of alternative governance. So the crisis of masculinity, crisis of governance, crisis of geopolitics, all these three have to be addressed. I'm speaking very academically, but it means life or death for millions of people living under ISIS rule right now.
And a quick word on the role the GCC can play here.
Well, I have no hope at all. As my colleagues have pointed out, they are compromised. Most of them think ISIS is probably a kind of a neutralizer for Iranian and Hezbollah influence. And you see even the media coverage in GCC countries of these attacks recently. Al Arabiya, the main Saudi channel, they have downplayed these things. It's almost as if it's not a problem, the attacks on Shias. And they also don't, even Qatar to some extent, they're not really highlighting the brutality and the impunity that ISIS is doing.
Okay.
You know, for them, Iran is a terrorist state. So this is all their obsession. So I think they got the priorities wrong, and they're going to suffer in the long run. Some of these regimes may eventually be toppled, because even though right now ISIS is not attacking them, you never know. Even Saudi, even Al Qaeda started that way. Eventually, it became very, very anti. It started as anti-Saudi, then moved away, then went back.
And even ISIS is on the Saudi doorstep now.
You cannot control the momentum of these, brutal warriors, holy warriors, once they are.
But you're not very positive about the role that the GCC can play here. Professor Chaulia, before we talk about how to counter this threat, I think you wanted to comment on the role of Turkey in this entire conflict, and even as you know, the IS seized back the Kobani territory in Syria. Many questions are being raised as to whether they got in from the Turkish side, and why did Turkey not try to stop these elements from entering Syria?
Well, unfortunately, Turkey has been the weakest link of the American strategy there. President Erdogan and his Islamist AKP party have basically cleared the pitch completely over the last 1 year. They are NATO members, but they have not really contributed at all to this. Rather, they have permitted free flow of fighters across the borders. And in a way, it's a kind of a, I think they are politically they've decided it's like a pressure safety valve, where some of the frustration are building up against Erdogan. He couldn't win recent election that could have led to constitutional amendments. So they are using this as a kind of so-called display of piety to their rural Anatolian Sunni conservative base, saying, look, the thing is, we are not with the Americans. We are not playing a Western agenda and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, it's enabling ISIS a lot. The other thing is, Turkey historically can be a useful player here in terms of the narrative, the ideological counter to ISIS. ISIS says it's a caliphate. It has re-established the caliphate. The last known caliphate was the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Caliphate. And barring the genocide of the Armenians, which was at the twilight of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire was actually a very liberal and, relatively speaking, of all the caliphates, very, very respectful of minorities and of deviants and those who are not in the mainstream Sunni stream. So you have to actually bring back that idea of the caliphate. This caliphate that Baghdadi wants is actually a demonic version of what the Ottomans had. The Ottomans had a relatively tolerant and plural and eclectic kind of caliphate. So Turkey actually, they had this neo-Ottoman people. The Arab world are afraid of the neo-Ottomanism and the Turkish imperialism. But the point is that imperialism was far more palatable than what you were getting by the Arabs themselves under Baghdadi. So we have to bring back these counter narratives to fight, and Turkey has a role to play. I hope they realize it. That playing the Sunni card is not going to work for them. They've got to think about Turkey's own great heritage as a pluralistic and tolerant place and promote that.
And it's actually playing right into the ISIS's, strategy of using the fault lines that exist in the society. A quick word on, what can be the political as well as ideological strategy of countering the ISIS threat.
Well, people have been saying don't call it Islamic State because it's not really Islamic. We've got to build upon that in a big way. And every society which are sending out recruits, there are over 100 countries that have now ISIS contributions. So all of them have to rethink, and even in our own country, we have had cases of hopefully a few dozen, or some say even a few hundred Indians who are now fighting for ISIS. So for all that, the war has to be fought not only in Syria and Iraq and in these neighboring countries where actual bloodshed is happening, but the level of indoctrination. And I'll give you examples like countries like Indonesia. They're worried. It's far more secular and liberal than what you have in the Middle East. It's the world's largest Muslim country. These kind of examples need to put up. Turkey could have been an example, but Erdogan spoiled it. So I think now, moderate Islamic countries which are democratic, which are secular like Indonesia, should come to the forefront, create a worldwide anti-ISIS league or something like that, because GCC and these kind of moribund organizations are actually, unfortunately, only helping ISIS